Friendship is no less complicated than a romantic relationship. Not everyone finds a true friend in their lifetime. A mistake can be so painful, even dangerous, that it can end in bloodshed. Anthony Dutcher was born on May 22, 1985, in Colorado Springs, Colorado. The boy was active and versatile. He had many different hobbies. He seemed to find time for everything. He learned several musical instruments, languages, and martial arts. He loved nature, went hiking, and could even survive several nights alone in the woods. Tony wanted to combine his love of languages and his passion for martial arts in the future. He wanted to become a translator, join the military, or do something similar. Everyone who knew him described him as very friendly and sociable, family-oriented and ambitious. Tony always made time for his loved ones, including his grandparents, Carl and Joanna Dutcher. They lived in a rural area called Guffey in the state of Colorado, with about 100 inhabitants. Everyone knew each other there. It was always quiet and peaceful. Guffey was a 1.5-hour drive from Colorado Springs. Anthony loved coming to stay with them because his relatives lived in the heart of nature, where he could pursue his passion for exploring the world around him. The small town consisted of only a few dozen houses scattered over a large area. His grandfather, Carl Dutcher, was born in 1940. He served in the Army for 20 years and then worked as a machinist. He spent the last 13 years of his working life in government structures. Carl built a successful career. Joanna was his partner for almost his entire life. She was born in 1942 and worked as a beautician, nurse, and later as a saleswoman in a store. They had known each other since childhood, grew up together from the age of 7, fell in love and decided to join their lives together. This happened in 1964. From that moment on, the Dutchers were inseparable. The couple had 3 sons, Charles, Anthony, and James. After the retirement, the husband and wife settled in Guffey to spend their retirement in peace. Here they built a farm, began farming, and raised animals. Joanna was quite sociable and active. Carl, on the other hand, became a homebody and tried not to leave the house as much as possible. The husband enjoyed working on his land and was happy when his grandson came to visit. They even bought a small piece of land in the valley below the farm where Anthony could build himself a proper cabin. It was a place on a hilltop that offered beautiful views of the surrounding area, including the family farm. The schoolboy had built a shelter with his grandfather several years before the events described. At 15, he began visiting more and more often, which greatly pleased his family. He and his grandfather had much in common. All this contributed to a very warm relationship. New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2000. Anthony was 15 years old. He wanted to spend this holiday with his grandmother and grandfather, who were 60 and 58 years old respectively at that time. His parents wanted to travel, and therefore happily agreed. On the morning of December 31st, Anthony's parents took him to his grandparents' house, where preparations for the festive evening were already in full swing. Later, a friend of Anthony's, Isaac Grimes, also 15 years old, wanted to join them. The boys had been best friends for a long time. They had planned to go to Anthony's cabin to camp and spend the holiday. Shortly before midnight, Anthony's mother called him. They exchanged congratulations, fearing that the line would be busy at 12 o'clock and they wouldn't be able to reach each other. Mother and son chatted a bit and agreed to call on the morning of January 1st when everyone was awake. Tony promised to call as soon as he got up. He was usually awake early. However, when his mother got up in the morning, she didn't receive the promised call, and there was no message, which struck her as odd. Tony usually sent a congratulatory text message, which was supposed to arrive at night in case the lines were congested. But this one didn't arrive either. The woman wasn't worried because it was a vacation and a holiday. She also knew that the students were planning to go to a cabin where reception could be poor. The grandparents didn't call either, which worried the woman. She decided to contact them and ask what was going on, but they both ignored her calls. The mother tried several times to reach a relative, but no one answered until January 3, 2001. Unable to dispel her anxiety with excuses about camping and holidays, she contacted the police, asking them to check on her relative's well-being. The police officers responded immediately to the call. When they arrived at the scene, they found chaos. An external examination revealed signs of a break-in. Someone had entered the house through the back door. Inside, everything was in disarray. Many items were broken. When they reached the kitchen, the patrol officers found Carl Dutcher lifeless. The man was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, apparently shot. Someone had fired 2 bullets at him, hitting him in the chest. From that moment on, the officers drew their service weapons, as the perpetrator could still be in the house. There was no gun near the body. This appeared to be foul play, not a voluntary end to his life. Therefore, the officers' fears seemed well-founded. When they reached the hallway, they found the body of a woman in the bathroom, lying on a broken toilet. It was Joanna. She, too, was dead, lying in a large pool of blood. She had been shot. 6 bullets had struck the defenseless woman. It was obvious that this was a murder. It couldn't have been accidental. What worried the family most was that Anthony wasn't found in the house. The police sealed off the farm and began an investigation. They first wanted to find out where the teenager was. Perhaps he needed help. The mother confirmed that he was supposed to be staying with relatives at the time and shouldn't have gone home alone without warning. The teenager was reported missing and the search began. The Dutcher family was shaken by the incident and decided to go to Guffey to help search for Anthony. The mother told police about her son's plans to spend the night at a forest camp, but couldn't explain the location of the cabin over the phone, which is why they wanted to do it there. While the Dutchers drove to the parents' farm, detectives continued to examine the crime scene. It appeared to be a spontaneous attack, as if Carl had walked into the kitchen and been shot without warning. He didn't even have time to defend himself. The man had no defensive injuries. Joanna likely had a little more time to react. She was attacked. Her head was slammed against the toilet bowl and then shot. Unlike her husband, she was able to react. The woman's hand was shot through. Joanna likely instinctively tried to protect herself from the bullet that penetrated her palm and into her head, killing her instantly. Everything indicates that she was the second victim of the unknown perpetrators. She likely tried to hide in the bathroom, but without success. According to experienced criminalists, the victims had spent several days in the house. The bodies had already begun to decompose, which is why there was an unpleasant odor there. Both victims were wearing nightclothes, which means they were attacked either just before the Dutchers were about to go to bed or immediately after waking up. During the investigation of the house, a small jacket was found in the living room, on which a trace could be seen, as if someone had wiped a bloody knife on it. A holster was also found here, which was used for carrying a firearm. The pistol itself, however, was missing. Investigators concluded that these items must be connected. Family members of the Dutchers who arrived in Guffey reported that Carl was very interested in firearms. He owned several different NT models. He also bought various pistols and rifles, restored them, and resold them. This was his hobby. At the time of the crime, there were several dozen firearms in his house. Now it was time to find out exactly what had disappeared. The deceased's son helped clarify this question. The man shared his father's interest and had a rough idea of what he currently owned. This was an important clue, as the weapons were not kept openly, but in a specially designated locked gun safe. Finding this safe, opening it, and stealing the pistol required a targeted approach. This meant that the perpetrator had to know his victims well and know where the gun safe was located. Investigators began to examine the theory that the murderer was the missing grandson, Anthony. The teenager's fate was unknown until then. It was assumed that he had taken up arms for some reason, killed his relatives, and was now on the run. Tony's parents, however, immediately dismissed any possibility of such events. He said he loved his grandparents very much and had an excellent relationship with all of them. The teenager, who was not mentally ill, had never run away. There had been no problems with him in general. Tony had never been violent before. When the missing student's mother and father arrived, they were finally able to lead the police to the camp in the woods, where Anthony planned to camp. He wanted to celebrate in a cabin with his best friend Isaac. The mother was hopeful of finding her son's life. She suspected he was hiding there from a threat. The property was located about 500 meters from the house, on a hill obscured on all sides by dense vegetation. Several police officers with weapons, accompanied by the woman, went there. When the police looked inside, they immediately saw a sleeping bag apparently occupied by someone, and a little further away, another, empty one. Board games lay next to it. Unfortunately, the worried mother's hopes were not fulfilled. Anthony was there, but the boy had also died a gruesome death. The teenager's throat had been slashed so deeply that he was practically decapitated. The perpetrator had delivered a powerful blow to leave him no chance of survival. There was no sign of the teenager resisting. He was taken by surprise and stabbed in cold blood. Tony was killed with a single blow, apparently with full force. Investigators noticed something very disturbing. Given the precision and force, it was possible that this was not the first time the killer had done something like this. The actions appeared professional and routine. Despite all the police's efforts, they were unable to find a weapon that could have been used in the attack. The parents were interviewed extensively. They provided information about everything Anthony might have taken with him. The perpetrator had likely taken valuables that could help identify him. Among the items not found with the teenager was a watch that his grandparents had given him for the holiday. It was a rather expensive and eye-catching accessory, with a blue flame motif. On the same day, investigators discovered that another 15-year-old teenager named Isaac Grimes was also scheduled to participate in the camping trip. This explained why there was another sleeping bag and an open game in Anthony's cabin. At least 2 people had clearly been there. However, the sleeping bag was empty. Police officers then began searching for another possible victim. They first decided to go to the student's house, as he lived nearby. To their surprise, they found him there. 15-year-old Isaac Grimes personally opened the door for them. The teenager was alive and appeared unharmed. The student told investigators that he had indeed arranged to go camping with his friend on New Year's Eve to visit his friend's relatives. They were planning to go camping there. However, at the last minute, he canceled his date with Anthony because other friends had invited him to Colorado Springs for a drink. A party was being held there, organized by older students. Isaac decided to go. According to him, he never arrived at the Dutcher's house, never saw his best friend, and didn't know what had happened to him. Isaac was very upset when he was told about the deaths of Anthony, his grandmother, and his grandfather. But something about his behavior was disturbing. Unfortunately, Anthony's mother didn't know for sure whether Isaac had gone to his friend's house that evening. They hadn't discussed it during their phone call with her son, But she knew for sure that Isaac had been to the cabin with Anthony before. He had shown him his secret place. No one else was allowed to know about it. The investigators decided to verify his statement and find out who Isaac had gone to the party with that evening. The teenager very reluctantly revealed two names. He had been invited by two schoolmates, Jonathan Matheny and Glenn Urban, who were 17 and 18 years old, respectively. The police contacted the two teenagers, who both agreed to an interview, but their conversation revealed something astonishing. Their stories were so similar that it seemed as if the teenagers had carefully prepared and memorized narratives. They used the same phrases and phrasing as if they had memorized the sentences. All of this was atypical for such interrogations. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough to hold any accusations against the young men. Evidence had to be found that connected them to the crime scene. In any case, the two older men and Tony's best friend came under suspicion. It was now unclear who owned the sleeping bag found next to Tony's body in his cabin. The autopsy report soon arrived. It turned out that all the victims, Carl, Joanna, and Anthony, had died on New Year's Eve. This suggested that the perpetrator had come specifically to kill all the family members living in the house, and that he knew where to find each one. This only confirmed that the man knew the Dutchers well, as practically no one knew the location of Tony's secret cabin and his grandfather's gun safe. This idea was further confirmed by the absence of weapons in Carl's house. The man had the habit of always taking a pistol with him before opening the door. It was even lying next to the front door. This may seem unusual, but for an American living in such isolation, it can be a matter of life and death. A gun can be useful for self-defense at any time. This habit was so deeply ingrained that the grandfather even welcomed his children and grandchildren with a gun. But for some reason, the man was caught off guard. Unfortunately, the killer, or killers, were very cautious and left no trace in the house. Given the distance between the house and the camp, it was assumed that Anthony was the first victim and was killed by one person. The robbery of the house could have been committed by someone else, as suggested by the changed behavior, different handwriting, and choice of weapon. However, these suspicions could not be proven. The investigation lasted 2 months, but no valuable clues had been found. On March 6, 2001, Isaac Grimes unexpectedly reported to the police. Fearing for his life, the 15-year-old teenager told a ludicrous story. He was being followed by a man with a shotgun who had shot his best friend's family. All of this might seem like the paranoia of a student overly impressed by the murder of 3 people. Against this backdrop, however, the investigators had renewed doubts. They decided to discuss the events of New Year's Eve once again. One of the investigators remembered the watch Tony's parents had mentioned. He was asked about it at a meeting with Isaac. Isaac said he had actually seen the accessory at his friend's house, which represented the most serious contradiction in the entire investigation. The watch had only been given as a gift on New Year's Day. Accordingly, Isaac could not have seen it if their meeting had indeed taken place shortly before midnight. This contradicted the suspense act's original statements. This meant that Isaac had been in the house and obviously knew something. It seemed as if things were finally moving forward. On March 8, 2001, the boy and his parents were summoned for an official interview. He continued to insist that he had not been at his friend's house on the fateful night. Then the police cleverly brought up the subject of the watch and exposed the teenager's lies, literally in front of his parents. It all culminated in an army jacket with traces of blood found in the victim's house. Finally, Isaac broke down due to the contradictions and obvious lies and confessed. The teenager recounted what had really happened that New Year's Eve. Isaac confessed that his classmate Jonathan Metheny had brought him to Anthony's house shortly before midnight. There the boys met, congratulated each other, and prepared for the celebration. Then they went together to the campsite, where they spent time as friends, playing games and telling stories. Anthony had no idea that his best friend had a knife with him. As the teenagers were about to go to bed, Isaac drew his friend's attention to the light in the window. He turned to look. Isaac approached his friend from behind, drew the knife, and stabbed Anthony with all his might, fatally. Later, the coroner was amazed that a 15-year-old student could inflict such a deep wound with a single stab. Isaac himself admitted that he had used all his strength. Then 17-year-old Jonathan Maffany showed up. He arrived at the Dutcher farm around 4 a.m. The boy had a rifle with him. He waited away from the house for Isaac to return. The two went inside the elderly couple's house and broke down the back door. The noise woke the residents. Joanna and Carl got up. The man went into the kitchen to see what was going on. Carl probably wanted to scare off the burglars, unaware that they had come to kill them. Jonathan shot the man first. Isaac just watched. After 2 shots, Carl immediately fell to the ground. Joanna, frightened, ran away and locked herself in the bathroom. She wanted to hide, but Jonathan didn't intend to leave any witnesses. The boy broke down the door, slammed the woman's head against the toilet, and then shot her. It's remarkable that all these horrific acts were committed by schoolchildren. Jonathan was 17 years old, Isaac only 15. According to Isaac, he simply followed his older friend and watched as he killed innocent people. The perpetrators knew about Carl's weapons and took several of them. They loaded them into the trunk of their car and simply drove off. Both drove to the house of Glenn Urban, the 18-year-old teenager, the oldest of the group. They gave him the knife and the rifle with which they had shot 2 people. He was supposed to clean up everything, thus becoming an accomplice. The police could not find a motive for the crime. Isaac stubbornly remained silent. Where the rifle came from also remained a mystery. Immediately after the confession of 15-year-old Jonathan Matheny, he was arrested. He denied his involvement in the triple murder. Then, Glenn Urban was arrested. He too resisted arrest for a long time. But finally, the high school student Glenn confessed that he had been tasked with destroying the weapon, but also provided another valuable clue. According to him, another teenager named Simon Sue, who was 18 at the time, was involved in the crime. According to Glenn, it was this young man who led the bloody massacre. Simon had selected the targets, directed the operation, and planned everything. He also explained how to eliminate traces of the crime. At his insistence, Glenn had to destroy the weapon. Therefore, the boy disassembled it and discarded the parts in various locations. During the entire investigation, the investigators heard the name Simon Sue for the first time. They immediately decided to speak to the other 2 people involved, but they stubbornly remained silent. It was revealed about the teenager that he had grown up very withdrawn and unloved, and that he had virtually no contact with others during his school years. He met Isaac, Glenn, and Jonathan in high school. Isaac and Simon were avid chess players and video gamers. This bonded them. All 3 were also unsociable and had almost no friends, yet desperately wanted to become more popular. After a while, all 3 fell under the influence of Simon, who promised them a better life. He immediately identified himself as a member of a secret organization and claimed to have contacts with the rebel army from Guyana. According to the description, all of this resembled the recruitment of students who had trouble socializing. They probably simply wanted to be part of something bigger. It then became clear that all of them had been deceived by Simon. Since joining this organization, They had to undergo special training that included shooting firearms and the correct technique for throat slitting. Simon gave them increasingly difficult and brutal tasks. It even went so far that he forced them to eat and drink to exhaustion, calling this torture a test of willpower. Eventually, the manipulator succeeded in confusing the young people so much that they could no longer imagine life without the organization and carrying out Simon's orders. The leader ran this club like a military organization. He gave each member a military rank and motivated them to serve him better. Simon forced the boys to give him a portion of their money. If they disobeyed, he punished them cruelly. The mentor's constant tasks included watching gruesome videos of real-life killings of animals and, later, people. At some point, however, Isaac showed dissatisfaction, as if he sensed he was doing something bad. Simon then declared him a traitor, threatened him with persecution and murder, and then demanded that he prove his loyalty to the group. All this happened under pressure from two older boys. Isaac was tasked with killing his best friend, Anthony, to prove his loyalty to the group. Jonathan was tasked with eliminating his grandparents. Both were to retrieve several weapons from Carl's house. Since they lived nearby, they knew about Carl's passion for restoring weapons and his gun safe. Thanks to Anthony, it wasn't difficult to find the location. But why was the Dutcher family chosen as the victims? The motive for the triple murder of these people remained a mystery. According to sources, Carl may have made an unpleasant remark to Simon. This could have provoked the hatred. However, there was no evidence for this. All the students, however, claimed that he incited them against Carl Dutcher for this reason. The real motive may have been the possession of firearms, which the perpetrator wanted to obtain for himself. When the police stormed Simon Sue's house with a search warrant, they were immediately able to confirm the statements of the other teenagers. In particular, they found several items that had been stolen from Carl. Everything looked as if preparations for a crime were indeed underway. Several dozen firearms were found on the leader. All of them were stolen in various robberies. Before the tragedy at the Dutcher farm, however, the robberies had not been violent. At least 36 pistols and rifles were found in the house, which now had to be examined. Despite being only 18 years old, the gang leader had his own warehouse where even more weapons, spare parts, and various stages of disassembly and ammunition were found. An entire arsenal was housed there, including AK-47s. According to the police, he could have armed a small infantry unit. Simon was taken in for interrogation. Although the young man was a quiet and unpopular person, he proved to be very cunning and cynical. He refused to admit his guilt and unhesitatingly accused Glenn, Isaac, and Jonathan of committing the crime and of only trying to make him a scapegoat. According to Simon, he was in Canada at the time of the robbery and therefore had nothing to do with the incident. Of course, the gang leader was lying. He denied having forced his friends to perform various extreme acts and described the club they allegedly belonged to as a purely entertainment community. He immediately began to say that all three accomplices had mental health and behavioral problems and described them all as aggressive. It was obvious that he had prepared well for his arrest. Ultimately, it was decided to try all perpetrators as adults for triple murder. Isaac Grimes pleaded guilty to the murder of his best friend, Anthony Dutcher. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 60 years. Jonathan Matheny and Simon Sue were charged with organizing criminal activity, planning murder, and illegal possession of a firearm. Jonathan was also charged with double murder. Ultimately, Jonathan received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 68 years. The instigator was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 53 years. Because Glenn had assisted the criminal gang and disposed of the murder weapon, he was sentenced to only 2 years. It was proven that he neither planned nor committed the crime, although he knew exactly what his friends were doing and did not help prevent the atrocities. Isaac's mother still can't believe that her son committed such a terrible crime. She doesn't understand how the kind, good-natured Isaac could have become a true monster under the influence of a dangerous manipulator. Isaac himself explains his involvement in the murder by saying he was intimidated and threatened. The teenager was threatened that his family would be killed if he didn't comply and play his part. Therefore, he was forced to stab his best friend. After beginning his prison sentence, Isaac wrote a letter expressing remorse for his actions. Some of Anthony's relatives don't believe his story of intimidation and believe that Isaac could have turned to the police. Then, no one would have been harmed. Neither Isaac's family nor the Dutcher family. The relatives of the murdered family consider the sentences too lenient. In their opinion, Simon and Jonathan deserve the death penalty for the brutal murder of innocent people. Anthony's mother declared that she forgave Isaac and even testified in his favor in court to reduce the sentence. The woman believes Isaac was a victim of Simon's manipulation. The mother was so distraught after her son's death that she even attempted suicide twice. She still writes letters to Isaac and feels compassion for him. Thanks for watching, and take care.